After 2 years of sweat equity renovating his so-called family home, draining my own savings to pay for the materials while he played project manager, my fiancé sat me down on the brand new sofa I bought, broke off our engagement, and told me I had exactly 24 hours to vacate his property. He had this arrogant, dismissive smirk on his face, truly believing he had successfully used me for free labor and was about to toss me out into the cold with absolutely nothing. That smirk completely disappeared a few days later when my lawyer politely reminded him that while he did, technically, own the physical structure of the house, I was the sole owner of the actual land the house was sitting on, and I was about to start charging rent. But, as always, we need to start at the beginning. Hello everyone, and welcome back to Whispered Drama Stories. I am so incredibly glad you decided to spend your time with me today. If you are a returning listener, grab your favorite blanket, pour yourself a hot cup of tea, or maybe a glass of wine, and welcome back to our safe space. If you are new here, please make yourself comfortable. This channel is dedicated to the complex, messy, and often deeply painful realities of toxic relationships. We talk about the betrayals that completely blindside us, the subtle manipulation tactics that keep us trapped, and most importantly, the profound, unshakable peace that comes from taking your power back and walking away with your head held high. Today's story is a masterclass in financial boundaries and the absolute necessity of keeping your paperwork in order when you are dating someone who lacks a moral compass. We are going to explore what happens when a partner views you not as a teammate but as a utility, a tool to be used to build their dream only to be discarded the moment the heavy lifting is finished. This is a story about sweat equity, unbelievable entitlement, and the ultimate, legally binding Uno reverse card. To really understand how I ended up covered in drywall dust, practically bleeding out my savings for a man who would eventually try to throw me on the street, you have to understand the dynamic I had with my ex-fiancé. Let's call him Greg. Greg was the kind of guy who looked fantastic on paper, and even better on Instagram. He was handsome, he was charming, and he had this incredibly persuasive way of talking about the future. He was always painting these grand, sweeping pictures of the life we were going to build together. He called himself a visionary, but as I would later learn the hard way, in the context of a toxic relationship, a visionary is often just a very polite word for a man who expects everyone else to execute his ideas while he takes all the credit. When we first met, I was completely swept off my feet. I was a practical, grounded person. I worked as a project manager for a mid-sized construction firm, which meant I spent my days dealing with budgets, timelines, contractors, and city permits. My life was very structured, very logical, and admittedly, a little bit boring. Greg brought spontaneity and excitement into my world. He made me feel like we were the main characters in a romantic movie. We dated for 2 years before he proposed. The proposal was, of course, highly documented and perfectly staged for social media. I said yes, genuinely believing I was marrying the man of my dreams. Right after we got engaged, Greg started talking obsessively about finding our forever home. But he didn't want to buy a normal, move-in-ready house in the suburbs. He wanted a project. More specifically, he wanted to reclaim his family's legacy. This is where the real estate anomaly comes into play. Greg's grandfather had owned a massive, beautiful piece of rural property about an hour outside the city. It had a classic, turn-of-the-century farmhouse on it, but Greg's family was notoriously terrible with money. Years before Greg and I even met, the grandfather had passed away. The property taxes had gone unpaid for over a decade, and the entire estate was seized by the county and auctioned off to clear the massive debts. Greg was obsessed with this house. He talked about it like it was his birthright that had been tragically stolen from him. So, when the property miraculously popped back up on the market as a bank-owned foreclosure, Greg viewed it as a sign from the universe. But there was a massive catch. The bank that foreclosed on the property had done something very specific to maximize their return. Because the farmhouse structure itself was in absolute ruins, the roof was caving in, the plumbing was destroyed, and the foundation needed serious work. The bank had legally subdivided the asset. They separated the deed for the physical structure of the farmhouse from the deed for the 12 acres of pristine, highly valuable land it sat on. The structure itself, the rotting, decaying farmhouse, was listed for a fraction of the cost, essentially priced as salvage. The 12 acres of land, however, were listed at a premium. Greg was absolutely frantic. He had recently received a modest inheritance from an aunt, just enough to buy the physical structure of the farmhouse outright, but he was completely tapped out after that. He had terrible credit, terrible debt-to-income ratios from his visionary lifestyle, and absolutely no bank was going to give him a mortgage for the land. He came to me, literally in tears, begging me to help him save his family legacy. "We're getting married," he pleaded, holding my hands in his. "This is going to be our home, where we raise our kids. I can buy the house with my inheritance, but I need you to buy the land. You have the savings. You have the credit. We can put the land in your name, the house in my name, and when we get married next year, we'll just merge the assets. It's an investment in our future. Please, don't let my grandfather's house slip away again." Because I loved him, and because I was wearing the rose-colored glasses of a newly engaged woman, I agreed. But because I am also a construction project manager who deals with contracts all day long, I didn't completely lose my mind. I didn't co-sign a loan with him, and I didn't mingle our names on a single deed. We went to the closing attorney. Greg used his inheritance to buy the physical structure of the farmhouse, obtaining a bill of sale and a deed for the improvements. I used my hard-earned savings as a massive down payment and took out a mortgage in my name only for the 12 acres of land. We signed an incredibly boring, standard legal document called a land lease agreement, basically stating that his structure was legally allowed to sit on my dirt. We laughed about it in the lawyer's office. Greg joked that he was my tenant. I joked that he better pay his rent in back rubs. It seemed so innocent at the time. I truly believed we were a team. The moment the ink was dry, the illusion of teamwork completely evaporated. The farmhouse was completely unlivable, so we kept our apartment in the city. But every single weekend, every holiday, and every evening after work, we drove out to the property to renovate. And when I say we renovated, I mean I renovated. Greg, true to form, immediately assumed the role of the architectural director. He spent hours creating Pinterest boards, picking out expensive paint colors, and talking to his friends about the bespoke, rustic aesthetic he was cultivating. But when it came time to actually swing a hammer, Greg was suddenly plagued with a mysterious series of ailments. His back hurt. His allergies were acting up. He needed to make a crucial phone call to a vendor right as we were supposed to carry 80-pound bags of concrete. Because of my background in construction, I actually knew how to do the work. I knew how to hang drywall. I knew how to lay tile. I knew how to properly insulate a drafty wall. So, I did it. For 2 agonizing years, I worked my stressful full-time corporate job from 8 to 5. Then I would drive an hour to the farmhouse, put on a respirator mask, and scrape decades-old lead paint off the walls until midnight. But the physical labor wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was the financial hemorrhage. Because Greg had completely drained his inheritance to buy the physical shell of the house, he had absolutely no money left for materials. When I asked him how he planned to pay for the new roof, the new copper pipes, and the thousands of feet of hardwood flooring, he looked at me like I was crazy. "We're building this together," he said, using his classic manipulation voice. "You have that great corporate salary. I put all my equity into securing the house itself. You cover the materials. I provide the vision. And it all balances out in the end. Besides, when we get married, what's mine is yours anyway." So, I paid. I paid for the new HVAC system. I paid for the custom kitchen cabinets he absolutely insisted we had to have to maintain the integrity of the farmhouse. I maxed out 2 credit cards paying for a master bathroom remodel that looked like it belonged in a luxury spa. I poured tens of thousands of dollars of my own money into the physical structure of a house that was completely, legally, 100% in his name. I was so exhausted, so deeply embedded in the sunk cost fallacy that I didn't even realize how completely I was being used. I would come home with blisters on my hands, completely covered in sawdust, only to find Greg sitting on the porch drinking a craft beer, posting a photo to Instagram of the newly installed windows with a caption like, "Blood, sweat, and tears going into my family estate today. #homeowner #grind." He never once tagged me. He never once mentioned that my money bought the windows, and my bleeding hands had installed them. As the 2-year mark approached, the house was finally, breathtakingly finished. It was a masterpiece. The hardwood floors gleamed, the wraparound porch was completely restored, and the kitchen looked like it belonged in an architectural magazine. We had finally moved out of our city apartment and fully moved into the farmhouse. I thought the stress of the renovation was the only thing causing the tension between us. I thought that once the dust literally settled, we could finally relax, plan our wedding, and be happy. But the moment the final piece of trim was nailed into place, Greg's entire demeanor changed. The subtle dismissiveness morphed into overt cruelty. He started picking fights over absolutely nothing. He criticized the way I dressed, telling me I was letting myself go, completely ignoring the fact that I hadn't had time to go to a gym in 2 years because I was building his house. He started spending late nights in the city, claiming he had to network for his new startup idea. He would come home smelling like expensive cologne and alcohol, completely ignoring me when I tried to talk to him. If I asked for help around the house, he would scoff and say, "I secured this entire estate for us. You can at least do the laundry." The environment became incredibly toxic, incredibly fast. I was walking on eggshells in a house I had literally rebuilt with my own bare hands. I felt like a ghost haunting my own life. I cried myself to sleep almost every night, wondering where the charming and loving man I got engaged to had gone, completely blind to the fact that he had never actually existed. The charming man was just a mask he wore until the house was finished. Once he didn't need my free labor and my credit cards anymore, the mask came off. The absolute breaking point happened on a Tuesday evening in late October. The air outside was crisp, and the leaves were starting to turn. I had just come home from a grueling day at my office. I walked into the living room, took off my coat, and stopped. Greg was sitting on the custom-upholstered, wildly expensive sofa I had purchased just 3 weeks prior. He was staring at the wall, completely motionless. He didn't look at me when I walked in. "Greg?" I asked, my stomach instantly tying itself into a knot. "Is everything okay?" He finally turned his head. His eyes were completely dead. There was no warmth, no hesitation, no guilt, just a cold, calculating emptiness. "Sit down," he ordered, his voice flat. I sat on the edge of the armchair across from him. I could hear the antique grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. "I'm going to make this quick, because dragging it out isn't going to help either of us," Greg said, leaning back and crossing his arms. "This isn't working for me anymore. The engagement is off. We are done." The words hit me like physical blows. My brain completely stalled. "What? Greg, what are you talking about? We just finished the house. We're sending out save the dates next month." "I don't love you," he stated, as casually as if he were discussing the weather. "Honestly, I haven't for a long time. You're too controlling. You're always stressed out. And we just don't have the same vision for life. I need someone who aligns with my energy, and that isn't you." I sat there staring at him, the reality of the last 2 years flashing before my eyes, the nights I spent breathing in drywall dust, the thousands of dollars I had poured into his dream, the backbreaking labor. He had waited, he had deliberately, maliciously waited until the very last drop of value had been extracted from me, until the house was perfectly finished, to throw me away. "You used me," I whispered, tears welling up in my eyes. "You used me to build this house." Greg let out a short, arrogant laugh. He actually smirked at me. It was a look of pure, unadulterated entitlement. "Don't be dramatic," he scoffed, standing up from the sofa. "You chose to help out. That was your decision. But this is my family's legacy. This is my house. My name is on the deed." He walked over to the front window, looked out at the rolling hills of the property, and turned back to me with that same sickening smirk. "Since the engagement is off, "There's really no reason for you to be here anymore," Greg said, looking down at me like I was a piece of trash he had just discovered on his shoe. "I have a date coming over tomorrow night, and I really don't want the awkwardness of my ex-fiancé crying in the guest room. So, I need you to pack your things. You have 24 hours to vacate my property." He thought he had won. He thought he had perfectly executed the ultimate scam. He owned the beautiful, fully renovated house, and he was kicking me out into the cold with absolutely nothing to show for my financial and physical sacrifice. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had just shattered my heart and tried to steal 2 years of my life. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I stood up, wiped the tears from my eyes, and felt an absolute, terrifying calm wash over my entire body. "Okay, Greg," I said softly. "I'll pack my things." I walked out the front door and drove away into the night. But what Greg completely forgot, in his arrogant, narcissistic haze, was the boring stack of paperwork we signed 2 years ago. He owned the wood and the nails of the house, but I owned the earth beneath it, and I was about to unleash a legal nightmare that would completely destroy his visionary life. I drove away from the farmhouse that night in a complete daze. I didn't pack all of my belongings. I just threw enough clothes for a few days into a duffel bag, grabbed my laptop, and got into my car. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely put the key into the ignition. As I pulled down the long gravel driveway, I looked in the rearview mirror at the beautiful, sprawling porch that I had spent 3 straight weekends sanding and painting. The porch lights were glowing warmly. It looked like a picture-perfect home, and I was leaving it with absolutely nothing but the clothes on my back. I checked into a cheap motel just off the highway, right on the border of the city. I sat on the edge of the stiff mattress, staring at the horrible floral wallpaper, and I finally let myself break down. I sobbed until my ribs physically ached. I grieved the relationship. I grieved the future I thought I was going to have, and I grieved the colossal, humiliating loss of my life savings. Greg had played me with terrifying precision. He had extracted every ounce of my energy, my money, and my love, and the absolute second the house was finished, he discarded me so he could play the wealthy bachelor in his family estate. But there is a very specific limit to how long a practical, logical person can stay completely broken. Sometime around 3 a.m, the tears finally stopped. The crushing, overwhelming grief started to recede, leaving behind a very sharp, very cold sense of clarity. I opened my laptop. I logged into my secure cloud storage, navigated to the folder labeled Legal, and opened the scanned PDF of the closing documents we had signed 2 years ago. I scrolled past the bill of sale for the structure. I scrolled past my mortgage agreement for the 12 acres. And then, I found it. The ground lease agreement. Because we weren't married when we bought the property, and because the bank had legally subdivided the asset, my real estate lawyer had insisted on drafting a formalized ground lease to protect my liability as the landowner. At the time, Greg and I had treated it as a completely hilarious formality. The lease stated that Greg, as the owner of the structure, was renting the land beneath it from me. Because we were engaged, the rent was set at a nominal fee of $1 per month, but I wasn't looking at the rent amount. I was looking for the termination clause. I found it on page 4. Paragraph 7. I read it over and over again, the words illuminating the dark motel room like a beacon of absolute salvation. This agreement constitutes a month-to-month tenancy at will. The landlord reserves the right to terminate this lease at any time, for any reason, with 30 days written notice to the tenant. Upon termination, the tenant is required to vacate the premises and remove all personal property, including any structures, improvements, or fixtures belonging to the tenant, restoring the land to its original vacant condition. Failure to remove the structure within the allotted time will result in the structure being considered abandoned property, which the landlord may seize, demolish, or sell at their sole discretion. I sat back on the motel bed and let out a laugh that sounded slightly unhinged in the quiet room. Greg owned the house. That was an undeniable legal fact, but his house was sitting on my dirt, and according to the ironclad legally binding contract he had hastily signed without reading 2 years ago, I had the absolute right to tell him to take his house and get it off my lawn. I didn't go to sleep. I waited for the sun to come up, and at exactly 8 a.m. I called my real estate attorney. I sat in my lawyer's office later that afternoon. He was a sharp, no-nonsense guy in his 60s who had seen every possible variation of property disputes. I sat across from his massive oak desk and told him exactly what Greg had done. I told him about the breakup, the smirking 24-hour eviction notice, and the fact that I had paid for every single nail, pipe, and gallon of paint inside that house. My lawyer listened quietly, his fingers steepled together. When I finished, he opened the file containing our ground lease agreement, flipped to page 4, and slowly smiled. Your ex-fiancé, my lawyer said, adjusting his glasses, is what we in the legal profession like to call a colossal idiot. He thinks he outsmarted you because his name is on the deed to the structure. What he fundamentally failed to understand is that in real estate, the land is the absolute king. A house without land to sit on is just a very expensive pile of wood. So what are our options? I asked, my heart beating fast with anticipation. We are going to send him a formal notice of lease termination, my lawyer explained. We are going to give him the legally required 30 days. We will demand that he physically uproot his 2-story fully renovated farmhouse and move it off your property. Now, to move a structure of that size, he will need to hire a specialized structural moving company, obtain massive highway permits, and buy a new piece of land to put it on. It will cost him upwards of $150,000, money which, you just informed me, he absolutely does not have. And if he can't move it? I asked. If he can't move it by day 31, my lawyer said, leaning back in his chair with a terrifyingly satisfied grin. The structure is legally considered abandoned on your property. You take full ownership of the house, free and clear. Or, we can offer to buy the structure from him right now for a fraction of its worth, just to save him the legal headache. The ball is entirely in your court. Draft the letter, I said. While my lawyer was busy drafting the ultimate legal nightmare, Greg was apparently living his best life. Mutual friends told me he was posting non-stop on social media. Pictures of the new custom kitchen with captions about bachelor life. Pictures of him drinking whiskey on the wraparound porch I had sanded by hand. He had actually brought that date over the very next night, showing off the beautiful family estate he had supposedly built with his own 2 hands. He was riding the absolute highest high of his narcissistic ego. He thought I was gone. He thought I was quietly crying in my city apartment, too embarrassed and broken to ever challenge him. 4 days after he kicked me out, the certified letter arrived at the farmhouse. I was sitting at my desk at my corporate construction job when my cell phone started vibrating off the table. The caller ID flashed Greg's face. I took a deep breath, let the phone ring 3 more times to establish dominance, and calmly answered it. Hello? I said smoothly. What the hell is this? Greg screamed. His voice was so loud I actually had to pull the phone away from my ear. The charming, smug visionary was completely gone. He sounded absolutely unhinged. I just got a letter from some lawyer saying I have to move my house? You can't do this. This is my house. My name is on the deed. You are absolutely correct, Greg, I replied, my voice completely devoid of any emotion. Your name is on the deed to the house, but my name is on the deed to the land beneath it, and I am officially terminating your ground lease. You have 26 days left to get your house off my property. You're crazy, he yelled, his panic completely overriding any logical thought. You can't just tell someone to move a house. That's impossible. I'll sue you. I'll take you to court. You can't kick me out of my own family estate. Greg, you literally sat on the sofa I bought and gave me 24 hours to vacate, I reminded him coldly. I am giving you 30 days. I am being incredibly generous, and you can certainly try to sue me, but you sign the lease. Your signature is on the document. I suggest you start calling structural moving companies. I hear they book up fast this time of year. I hung up the phone and immediately blocked his number. I knew he was going to spiral, and I didn't need a front row seat to his temper tantrums. All communication from that point forward was routed strictly through my lawyer. And spiral he did. Through my lawyer, I learned exactly how the next 2 weeks played out for Greg. He scrambled to find a real estate attorney who would take his case. He finally found one. But the moment Greg's new lawyer read the ground lease agreement, he essentially told Greg he was completely screwed. The contract was airtight. Greg had absolutely no legal right to keep his physical structure on my land without my permission. Then Greg actually tried to look into moving the house. He got quotes from structural movers. Exactly as my lawyer predicted, the quotes were astronomical. They needed to sever the foundation, lift the entire 2-story house on hydraulic jacks, load it onto a massive flatbed, and transport it. The quotes came in at around $120,000, not including the cost of buying a new plot of land to put it on. Greg had completely drained his inheritance buying the shell 2 years ago. He had terrible credit. Because he hadn't held a steady job in months, he couldn't get a personal loan for $5,000, let alone $120,000. By day 20 of the 30-day notice, the reality had completely crushed him. He was out of options, out of money, and out of time. His lawyer reached out to mine with a settlement offer. Greg offered to sell me the physical structure of the house, essentially merging the 2 deeds back together, so he could walk away without the financial ruin of abandoning the property. His initial asking price was the current, fully appraised market value of the renovated farmhouse. He wanted $300,000. He actually thought he was going to walk away rich. I sat in my lawyer's office, looking at the settlement offer, and I actually laughed out loud. Counteroffer, I told my lawyer. Tell him I am willing to buy the physical structure of the house, but I'm not paying market value. I am paying exactly what he paid the bank for the rotting shell 2 years ago, $40,000. Oh, and deduct the $22,000 in credit card debt I currently hold for the materials I bought to fix it up. I will offer him exactly $18,000 to walk away. My lawyer's eyes gleamed. He drafted the counteroffer and sent it over. Greg absolutely lost his mind. His lawyer called my lawyer screaming about sweat equity and unjust enrichment. But my lawyer was a shark. He calmly reminded Greg's attorney that if Greg didn't accept the $18,000 by day 30, the house would be legally declared abandoned. I would take full ownership of the entire multi-$100,000 asset for exactly $0, and I would sue Greg for the legal costs of the abandonment proceedings. Greg was trapped in a financial checkmate of his own creation. He had tried to steal my labor, my money, and my home, and in doing so, he had blindly walked into a bear trap. On day 28, 2 days before the eviction deadline, Greg signed the paperwork. He accepted the $18,000. He signed a quitclaim deed, transferring full, unconditional ownership of the physical structure of the house to me. For the first time in 2 years, the 12 acres of land and the fully renovated farmhouse were legally bound together under one name. My name. I drove out to the farmhouse the very next morning. Greg's car was gone. He had packed his bags, taken his $18,000, barely enough to cover a security deposit and a few months of rent on a small apartment in the city, and disappeared. I unlocked the front door and walked into the quiet, sunlit living room. I looked at the gleaming hardwood floors I had laid down on my hands and knees. I looked at the pristine, white, custom kitchen cabinets I had maxed out my credit cards to buy. It was perfectly quiet. There was no walking on eggshells. There was no arrogant man sitting on the sofa telling me I was worthless. It was just my house, my beautiful, hard-earned, legally bulletproof house. I didn't stay there. The house held too many memories of exhaustion and manipulation. I wanted a completely fresh start. I immediately hired a top-tier real estate agent and put the entire estate, the land, and the fully renovated house on the market. Because the property was absolutely stunning, and because the market for rural luxury homes was booming, it triggered a bidding war. It sold in 14 days for significantly over the asking price. I took the massive profit from the sale, paid off the mortgage on the land, paid off every single credit card I had used for the renovations, and walked away with a life-changing amount of money in the bank. I used that money to put a down payment on a beautiful, modern townhouse in the city. Exactly where I wanted to be. Completely funded by the arrogant mistake of a man who thought he could use me and throw me away. Last I heard through the grapevine, Greg was back to living in a cramped apartment with a roommate, trying to launch a new visionary startup that wasn't going anywhere, completely devoid of his grand family estate. He played a stupid game, and he won the ultimate stupid prize. Thank you so much for sticking with me through this story today. I know the legal details of real estate can be a little dry, but when they are used to completely dismantle a toxic, entitled person's life, I think they become absolutely fascinating. There is a huge lesson here for anyone listening who is in a relationship with someone who promises you the world but expects you to build it. Never, ever confuse love with a lack of legal protection. When you are combining assets, when you are pouring your life savings and your physical labor into a project, get it in writing. Protect your investments. A good partner will never be offended by a contract. They will welcome it because they want you to feel secure. If someone expects you to build their empire with zero legal equity, they are not looking for a partner. They are looking for an unpaid employee. Now, I want to hear from all of you. Have you ever poured your heart, your time, or your money into someone else's dream, only for them to try and leave you with nothing? How did you untangle yourself? And how did you get your revenge? Please, scroll down to the comments and share your experiences. Your stories are what make this community so incredibly strong and validating. If you loved this story and want to hear more whispered drama stories about toxic relationships, family drama, and ultimate vindication, please take 2 seconds to hit the like button. It helps the channel so much. Make sure you are subscribed and have the notification bell turned on so you are the first to know when a new story goes live. Thank you again for spending your time with me, for validating these experiences, and for being part of this amazing community. Keep your boundaries strong, keep your paperwork filed, and never let anyone take credit for the life you built. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you in the next video.